The dusty streets of Green River, Wyoming stretched before Yates Ingram like a sun-bleached canvas in the summer of 1878. But he barely noticed the familiar landscape, because all his attention had fixed on the woman standing alone outside the general store, her hand resting lightly against the wooden post as though listening to something only she could hear. Her dress was simple calico, faded blue with small white flowers, and her dark hair fell in a thick braid down her back. She wore no bonnet despite the harsh afternoon sun, and her face tilted slightly upward, eyes closed, as if drinking in sounds rather than sights. Yates had just dismounted from his stallion after 2 weeks driving cattle north from the railhead in Rawlins, covered in trail dust and bone-weary, but something about her stillness made him pause with his hand still on the saddle horn. He watched as a young boy nearly collided with her, running past in pursuit of a rolling hoop. She stepped aside at the last possible moment, her movements fluid and certain despite never opening her eyes. That was when Yates understood. She could not see. The realization struck him with unexpected force, not with pity but with something else entirely. She stood there in her own darkness with such quiet dignity, such presence, that he found himself unable to look away. The dusty street seemed to fade. The noise of wagons and merchants calling out their wares became distant, and all that existed was this moment of recognition that felt like falling and flying at the same time. Yates had never believed in love at first sight. He had courted a girl back in Missouri before the war had scattered families like dandelion seeds, and that had been pleasant enough, based on familiarity and shared history. This feeling coursing through him now bore no resemblance to that gentle affection. This was immediate and absolute, as though his heart had simply decided without consulting his mind. He tied his horse to the hitching post and found his feet carrying him toward her before he had consciously decided to move. Up close, he could see she was perhaps 22 or 23, only a few years younger than his own 26 years. Her face was lovely, with high cheekbones and full lips, but it was the expression of peaceful awareness that truly captivated him. She was not waiting for help or looking lost. She was simply being, entirely comfortable in her surroundings despite her blindness. "Excuse me, miss," Yates said, his voice coming out rougher than intended, still dry from the trail. Zelda Owens turned her head toward the sound, and a slight smile touched her lips. The voice that had spoken was deep and warm, carrying an undertone of genuine respect rather than the careful pity she had grown accustomed to hearing. She could tell much about a person from their voice, and this man sounded tired but kind, weathered but not hardened. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I apologize for disturbing you. I just arrived in town and I am looking for the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson's place. I was told it was on this street." Zelda's smile widened slightly. "You are standing almost directly across from it. About 30 paces straight ahead, then 2 buildings to your right. You will smell bread baking. Mrs. Henderson makes her loaves every afternoon around this time." Yates felt foolish for using such a transparent excuse to speak with her, but he could not bring himself to simply walk away. "Thank you kindly. That is very helpful. Have you lived in Green River long?" "All my life," Zelda said. 23 years this past April. My father runs the livery stable at the end of this street. I know this town better than most people who can see it." There was no bitterness in her tone, just simple facts stated with quiet confidence. Yates found himself smiling despite his trail weariness. "I can well believe that. Sometimes I think we rely too much on our eyes and not enough on our other senses." "Miss, I know this is forward of me, but would you allow me to introduce myself properly? My name is Yates Ingram. I have just signed on as a ranch hand at the Triple Creek outfit about 10 miles west of here." Zelda tilted her head slightly, considering. There was something about this man's voice that called to something deep within her, a resonance she had never experienced before. She had learned to be cautious, as the world could be cruel to a blind woman, but her instincts told her this man meant no harm. More than that, they told her this meeting mattered in ways she could not yet understand. "Zelda Owens," she replied, extending her hand in the general direction of his voice. Yates took her hand gently, marveling at the softness of her skin and the surprising firmness of her grip. "Miss Owens, it is truly a pleasure. Would you think me too bold if I asked permission to call on you sometime? Perhaps this Sunday after church?" Zelda felt warmth rise in her cheeks. It had been a long time since a man had expressed genuine interest in courting her. Most men in Green River had known her since childhood and saw only her blindness, not her as a woman. This stranger saw something different. She could hear it in his voice, in the slight catch of breath when he held her hand, in the nervous hope underlying his question. "I think that would be acceptable, Mr. Ingram," she said softly. "My father and I attend services at the Methodist Church on the north end of town. We usually arrive home around noon. Then I will call at 12:30 if that suits you." "It does." They stood there for another moment, neither quite willing to break the connection, until Zelda finally withdrew her hand with a slight laugh. "You had better see about securing your room, Mr. Ingram. Mrs. Henderson fills up quickly, especially on Saturdays when the ranch hands come to town." "Yes, of course. Thank you, Miss Owens. I look forward to Sunday." Yates forced himself to walk away, leading his horse across the dusty street toward the boarding house. He glanced back once and saw that Zelda had turned her face in his direction, as though she too was reluctant to let the moment end. Then she gathered her skirts and walked down the wooden sidewalk with careful but confident steps, one hand trailing lightly along the storefronts to guide her way. The boarding house was exactly where Zelda had said it would be, and the smell of baking bread did indeed mark it clearly. Mrs. Henderson was a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, who showed him to a small but clean room on the second floor. Yates paid for a week in advance, cleaned up at the washstand, and headed back out to report to the ranch before sundown. The ride west to Triple Creek gave him time to think about the encounter. He had come to Wyoming territory to start fresh after years of drifting following the war. The ranch job was honest work with decent pay, and he had hoped to save enough to perhaps start his own small spread someday. He had not expected to meet a woman who would turn his careful plans sideways with just a few words and a smile. What was it about Zelda Owens that had affected him so powerfully? Was it her composure, her obvious intelligence, the way she navigated her world with such grace? Or was it something deeper, something that defied explanation? Yates was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy, but he could not shake the feeling that his life had just changed course in a fundamental way. The ranch foreman, a grizzled cattleman named Doyle Carter, put Yates to work immediately checking fence lines and moving cattle to fresh grazing. The work was hard but familiar, and Yates threw himself into it with his usual steady determination. Yet even as he rode the range under the wide Wyoming sky, his thoughts kept returning to a woman with unseeing eyes and a voice like quiet music. Sunday seemed impossibly far away. Meanwhile, Zelda walked home with her heart beating faster than usual. She lived with her father, Marcus Owens, in a small house behind the livery stable. Her mother had died of fever when Zelda was 15, and since then, she and her father had formed a close partnership, running the stable together and managing their household with practiced efficiency. Marcus was in the corral working with a young horse when Zelda arrived. She heard the rhythm of hoofbeats and her father's low, encouraging words. She waited by the fence until he finished, not wanting to distract him during the delicate work. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Marcus called as he led the horse back to the barn. "Interesting," Zelda replied, unable to keep a certain tone from her voice. Marcus emerged from the barn and studied his daughter's face. He knew her expressions better than anyone, and he could see something had happened. "Interesting how?" Zelda told him about the encounter with Yates Ingram, about his request to call on Sunday. Marcus listened carefully, his weathered face thoughtful. "A ranch hand from Triple Creek, you say? That is a good outfit. Doyle Carter runs a tight ship out there. What did you think of this young man?" "I liked his voice," Zelda said simply. "He was respectful, and he did not treat me as though I were made of glass or unable to think for myself. He spoke to me as though I were any other woman he might wish to court." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then I will look forward to meeting him on Sunday. But I will also want to ask Doyle about him when I am in town next. You know I will always protect you, daughter." "I know, Papa, and I love you for it, but I am also 23 years old and capable of making my own judgments. This man felt different. I cannot explain it better than that." "Sometimes the heart knows things the mind cannot explain," Marcus said quietly. "Your mother and I knew within days that we would marry. When it is right, you simply know." Zelda hugged her father, grateful as always for his understanding. That night, she lay in her bed listening to the familiar sounds of Green River settling into evening, and she thought about a voice that had stirred something long dormant in her soul. The days until Sunday passed with agonizing slowness for Yates. He worked from dawn until dusk, riding fence lines, doctoring sick cattle, and helping with the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. His fellow ranch hands were a mixed group, some young like himself, others grizzled veterans of the range. They were curious about the new man, but accepted him readily enough once they saw he knew his way around cattle and horses. On Saturday evening, Yates rode back into Green River to spend the night at the boarding house. He took extra care with his appearance on Sunday morning, shaving carefully and putting on his one good shirt and clean trousers. He attended the Methodist service, sitting in the back pew, and he saw Zelda enter with her father. Marcus Owens was a solid-looking man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. He guided Zelda to a pew near the front with a gentle hand on her elbow, and Yates watched how confidently she moved, how she needed only the slightest guidance to navigate the church. During the service, Yates found it difficult to concentrate on the sermon. His eyes kept drifting to Zelda's profile, to the way sunlight from the tall windows caught in her dark hair, to the peaceful expression on her face as she listened to the preacher's words. When the congregation rose to sing hymns, her voice lifted clear and true, and Yates felt something tighten in his chest. After the service, people gathered outside to socialize. Yates waited nervously, hat in hand, until Marcus and Zelda emerged. He approached them with his heart pounding. "Mr. Owens, my name is Yates Ingram. I spoke with your daughter earlier this week and requested permission to call on her today. I hope that is still acceptable." Marcus looked him over with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He saw a tall, lean young man with honest features and work-roughened hands. The boy met his gaze steadily, showing respect but not servility. "I have heard of you," Marcus said. "Doyle Carter speaks well of your work. You may call on Zelda. We live behind the livery stable. You know where that is?" "Yes, sir." 12:30 then. Do not be late." "I will not, sir. Thank you." Zelda had been standing quietly during this exchange, but now she turned toward Yates with a smile. "I am glad you came to services, Mr. Ingram. It shows good character." "I was raised to observe the Sabbath, Miss Owens. though I confess I found it hard to concentrate on the sermon today." "And why was that?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. "Because I kept thinking about our conversation and hoping very much that you had not changed your mind about allowing me to call." Zelda laughed, a warm, unaffected sound. "I do not change my mind easily, Mr. Ingram. I will see you this afternoon." Yates spent the intervening hours in a state of nervous anticipation. He had courted girls before, but this felt entirely different. He bought a small bouquet of wildflowers from a Mexican woman selling them in the town square, then second-guessed the gesture. Would flowers mean anything to a woman who could not see them? But surely she could appreciate their scent, their texture. At precisely 12:30, he knocked on the door of the small house behind the livery stable. Marcus answered and invited him in with a stern expression that did not quite hide a glimmer of amusement. The house was neat and comfortable, with simple furniture and lace curtains at the windows. Zelda appeared from the kitchen wearing a dress of pale green that brought out the warmth in her complexion. Yates offered her the flowers somewhat awkwardly. "I brought these for you, Miss Owens. I know you cannot see them, but I thought perhaps you might enjoy their scent." Zelda took the bouquet and brought it to her face, inhaling deeply, her expression lit with genuine pleasure. "They are beautiful, Mr. Ingram. I can smell prairie roses, Indian paintbrush, and something else I cannot quite identify." "Lupine, I think," Yates said. "At least, that is what Mrs. Gutierrez called them." "How thoughtful. Thank you. Please sit down. Would you like some lemonade? I made it fresh this morning." They settled into the small parlor under Marcus's watchful eye. The older man sat in his chair by the window, ostensibly reading a newspaper, but clearly paying close attention to every word. Yates found himself surprisingly comfortable despite the scrutiny. Zelda had a gift for conversation, asking intelligent questions about his work at the ranch, his background, his plans for the future. Yates told her about growing up in Missouri, about his family's small farm, about the war that had taken his father and older brother, and left him as the only man in a household of women. He spoke of his mother and 3 sisters, of leaving home at 18 to spare them one more mouth to feed, of drifting west through hard work and harder times until landing in Wyoming territory. "You write to your family?" Zelda asked. "Every month." "My youngest sister writes back, reading my mother's news and adding her own. They are doing well enough. My mother remarried 2 years ago, a good man who treats her kindly. My sisters are all spoken for or married now. They no longer need me, which gives me freedom to make my own way." "But you miss them." It was not a question. Yates looked at Zelda with renewed wonder. How did she read him so easily? "I do, but a man has to forge his own path. I hope to bring them out here someday when I have my own place, show them this country. It is beautiful in a fierce kind of way." "Describe it for me," Zelda said softly. "Describe what you see when you look at Wyoming." Yates hesitated, then began to speak, choosing his words carefully. He described the endless sky, bigger than any sky he had seen back east, shifting from pale blue to deep azure throughout the day. He told her about the mountains visible in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in summer, standing like ancient sentinels over the high plains. He painted pictures of sagebrush silvery green under the sun, of golden grasslands rippling in the wind like a vast ocean, of red rock formations twisted into impossible shapes by centuries of erosion. Zelda listened with her whole being, her face turned toward him, her expression rapt. "You describe it like a poet," she said when he finally fell silent. "I am no poet, just a cowboy trying to share what I see." "Then you are a cowboy with a gift. Most people look but do not truly see. You pay attention. That is rare." Marcus cleared his throat from his chair. It is getting on toward evening. Perhaps you should see Mr. Ingram out, Zelda." They both stood, and Yates found himself reluctant to leave despite having spent several hours in the Owens household. At the door, Zelda extended her hand and he took it, holding it perhaps a moment longer than was strictly proper. "Thank you for coming today, Mr. Ingram. I very much enjoyed our conversation. Would it be acceptable if I called again next Sunday?" Yates asked. "I would be disappointed if you did not." Yates left feeling as though he were walking on air. Behind him, Marcus watched through the window and then turned to his daughter with a knowing expression. "That young man is smitten with you, daughter." Zelda ducked her head, but she was smiling. "And I find myself quite smitten with him, Papa. Is that foolish? I have only met him twice. Your mother and I knew almost immediately. Sometimes the heart is wiser than the head, but take your time. Let him prove himself steady and true. Love that lasts is built on more than just initial attraction." "I know, Papa, I will be careful, but I will also be open to what might develop. He makes me feel like a woman, not just a blind girl to be pitied or protected. When he describes the world to me, I can see it through his eyes." That is a precious gift. The following weeks established a pattern. Yates would ride in from Triple Creek each Saturday evening, attend church on Sunday morning, and spend the afternoon with Zelda under her father's watchful supervision. As the summer days stretched long and warm, Marcus gradually relaxed his vigilance, allowing them to sit on the porch or walk slowly around the property while he worked in the stable within earshot. During these visits, Yates and Zelda talked about everything and nothing. He told her stories of life on the ranch, the characters among the cowboys, the daily challenges of working cattle. She shared her own world with him, explaining how she navigated Green River through memory and sound, how she helped her father with the stable accounts because numbers made sense to her even without sight, how she loved music and could play simple melodies on the old piano in the church hall. One Sunday in late July, Yates arrived with a proposition. "Miss Owens, I wondered if you might allow me to take you riding. There is a place about 2 miles north of town, along the Green River where it bends through a cottonwood grove. It is peaceful and beautiful, and I thought you might enjoy the outing." Zelda felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. She had ridden as a child before the fever that had taken her sight, but not since then. The thought was both frightening and thrilling. "I would need to ride with you," she said. "I could not manage a horse on my own." "Of course. You would ride with me. I have a gentle mare that will not spook easily. With your father's permission, naturally." Marcus considered the request. He had been observing Yates carefully over the past weeks and found much to approve. The young man was respectful, hardworking, and clearly devoted to Zelda. More importantly, Zelda glowed with happiness in his presence in a way Marcus had not seen since before her mother's death. "You may go," Marcus said finally, "but have her back before sundown." They rode out with Zelda seated in front of Yates, his arms around her holding the reins. She fit perfectly against him, her back against his chest, and Yates tried to ignore how right it felt to hold her this way. He kept the mare to a gentle walk, pointing out landmarks along the way and describing the landscape. The cottonwood grove was a pocket of green coolness in the summer heat. The river ran shallow and clear over smooth stones, and the trees rustled with a sound like falling rain. Yates helped Zelda dismount and guided her to sit on a fallen log near the water's edge. "This is lovely," Zelda said, turning her face toward the sound of the river. "I can hear how the water moves around the rocks, and the trees sound like they are whispering secrets." Yates sat beside her, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how improper this might appear if anyone saw them. Yet he trusted himself to behave honorably, and he sensed that Zelda trusted him too. May I ask you something personal, Miss Owens? You may. And I wish you would call me Zelda. I think we know each other well enough now to dispense with such formality when we are alone. Zelda, then, and you must call me Yates. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What happened to your sight? You said you have been blind all your life, but something in the way you move sometimes makes me think perhaps it was not always so. Zelda was quiet for a moment, her face turned toward the river. You are perceptive. I was born with sight. I was not struck blind until I was 7 years old. There was a fever that swept through Green River that winter. It took many people, including several children. I survived, but the fever damaged something in my eyes. The doctor said the optic nerves were affected. I woke up one morning and everything was dark, and it has been dark ever since. That must have been terrifying for a child. It was. For a long time I was angry and frightened. I did not understand why God would take my sight when He had already taken so many lives that winter. My mother was patient with me, though. She helped me learn to navigate by touch and sound. She taught me that blindness was a limitation but not a cage, that I could still live a full life if I learned to adapt. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. I miss her every day. After she died, I think I might have retreated into myself entirely if not for my father. He needed me, and that gave me purpose. We learned to run the stable together to manage on our own. It made me stronger. Yates reached out and gently took her hand. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Zelda, and one of the most remarkable. Zelda turned toward him, and though her eyes could not see his face, she lifted her free hand and carefully traced his features with her fingertips. Yates sat very still, barely breathing as she explored the line of his jaw, the shape of his nose, the curve of his lips. Now I know what you look like, she said softly. You have a good face, an honest face. Zelda, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, have been the happiest of my life. I know it is early yet, and I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know that my intentions are serious. I am courting you with the hope that you might someday consent to be my wife. Zelda's breath caught. She had sensed the depth of his feelings, had felt her own emotions growing stronger with each meeting, but hearing him speak it aloud made it real in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. Yates, I feel the same way. When I heard your voice that first day, something inside me recognized you. I know that sounds fanciful, but it is the truth. Since then, every moment with you has only confirmed that initial recognition. I believe we were meant to find each other. Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Then we will take our time and do this properly. I want to build something with you, Zelda. A life, a home, a future. I do not have much right now, just my wages and my prospects, but I am a hard worker and I am good with cattle. In time, I can give you the life you deserve. I do not need riches, Yates. I need honesty, kindness, and partnership. Those things you already possess in abundance. They sat together by the river for another hour, talking about their hopes and dreams, making tentative plans for a future that was beginning to take shape in both their minds. When they finally rowed back to Green River, as the sun sank toward the horizon, they did so with a deeper understanding between them, a commitment forming that would change both their lives. Marcus saw the change in his daughter immediately. That evening, after Yates had left to return to the ranch, he sat with Zelda on the porch and asked directly what had transpired. Zelda told him honestly about their conversation, about Yates's declaration of serious intent. Marcus listened quietly, his weathered face thoughtful. Do you love him, daughter? I believe I am falling in love with him, yes. It feels right, Papa. He does not see my blindness as a burden or something to pity. He sees me. And when I am with him, I feel complete in a way I never have before. He is a good man, Marcus agreed. I have made inquiries. Everyone speaks well of him. He works hard, saves his money, does not drink to excess or gamble. Doyle Carter says he is the most reliable hand on the ranch. If he is the man you want, you have my blessing, but make him court you properly for a decent interval. A hasty wedding would give people cause to gossip. I have no intention of rushing, Papa. We both want to do this right. But knowing his intentions, knowing where this is leading, makes everything sweeter. The rest of the summer and into the fall, Yates continued his faithful Sunday visits. He began taking on extra work at the ranch, volunteering for the less pleasant tasks that paid a bit more, saving every spare dollar toward his future with Zelda. Doyle Carter, observing this dedication, took him aside one day in September. I hear you are courting Marcus Owens's daughter, the foreman said without preamble. Yes, sir, I am, Yates replied, wondering if this would cause problems with his employment. Good for you. She is a fine woman. My wife knows her from church, says she is smart as a whip and sweet-natured despite her affliction. You planning to marry her? I am, sir, when I can afford to support a wife properly. Doyle nodded approvingly. I respect a man who plans ahead. I have a proposition for you. The ranch owner, Mr. Sullivan, wants to expand the breeding program. We need someone knowledgeable about horses to oversee it, work with the stock, train the young ones. It pays better than regular ranch work and comes with a small house on the property. You interested? Yates could barely believe what he was hearing. Very interested, sir. I grew up working with horses. My father bred them before the war. I know. I checked into your background. You start after the fall roundup. Prove yourself with this, and there could be a partnership stake in the operation down the line. Mr. Sullivan likes to reward good workers. Yates felt as though the pieces of his life were falling into place with stunning speed. That Sunday, he could barely contain his excitement as he told Zelda about the opportunity. This changes everything, he said. With the increased wages and the house, I could support a family. Zelda, I know we said we would take our time, but would you consider setting a date? Perhaps next spring. That would give us time to prepare properly, and it would be almost a year since we met. Zelda's face lit with joy. Yes, Yates. Yes, I will marry you next spring. April, I think, when the wildflowers are blooming and the world is coming back to life. That evening, Yates formally asked Marcus for Zelda's hand. The older man had been expecting this and gave his consent with barely concealed pleasure. Take care of her, son. She is my most precious treasure. I will guard her with my life, sir. I promise you that. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Green River. Most people were genuinely happy for the couple, though there were a few who whispered that it was a shame for a young man to saddle himself with a blind wife. These whispers reached Yates through well-meaning friends, and he responded with quiet firmness. Zelda is not a burden. She is a blessing. Any man would be lucky to have her as his wife, and I count myself the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. Winter came to the high plains with its usual severity. Yates moved into the small house that came with his new position and spent his free time making it ready for a bride. He repaired loose boards, installed new shelves in the kitchen, and built sturdy furniture from rough lumber. Marcus helped with some of the carpentry, and the two men grew closer through their shared work. Zelda spent the winter months preparing her trousseau, sewing new dresses and linens with the help of ladies from the church. She might not be able to see her stitches, but her fingers were deft and sure, and her work was as fine as any sighted woman's. She also learned the layout of her new home through Yates's careful descriptions and Marcus's guidance, so that by the time spring came she could navigate it in her mind. They saw each other every Sunday without fail, and their love deepened through the long winter. Yates read to her from books borrowed from the church, his voice bringing stories to life. Zelda played the piano for him, her fingers finding the keys with unerring accuracy, filling the small church hall with music that spoke what words could not express. On a Sunday in March, with the snow beginning to melt and the first hints of green appearing on the prairie, Yates took Zelda's hand and spoke seriously. "I have been thinking about our wedding day. I want to make sure you have everything you want, but I also want to be sensitive to your needs. Will it bother you, standing before the congregation when you cannot see their faces?" Zelda squeezed his hand. "I will not be looking at them. I will be listening to you speak your vows. That is all that matters to me. And Yates, I want to ask something of you. I want you to describe your expression when you first see me in my wedding dress. I want to know what you look like at that moment. I promise. Though I can tell you now, I will look like the happiest man alive." The wedding was set for the last Saturday in April. As the day approached, the whole town seemed to catch wedding fever. The ladies of the church decorated the sanctuary with wildflowers and ribbons. Mrs. Henderson offered to make the wedding cake. The ranch hands from Triple Creek pitched in to buy a fine set of dishes as a gift. Zelda's wedding dress was made of cream-colored silk that Marcus had purchased from a traveling merchant at great expense. The ladies had helped her sew it, and it fit her perfectly, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. When she put it on for the first time the night before the wedding, her father's eyes filled with tears. "You look just like your mother did on our wedding day," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She would be so proud of you, sweetheart, so proud of the woman you have become." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, perfect April weather. Yates stood at the front of the church in his new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone must hear it. The small church was packed with people from town and from the ranch, all come to witness the marriage. When Zelda appeared at the back of the church on her father's arm, Yates forgot to breathe. She moved with serene confidence despite being unable to see the crowd or the flower-lined aisle. Her face was luminous with joy, and she seemed to glow from within. As she reached the front of the church and Marcus placed her hand in Yates's, she whispered, "Tell me, how do you look right now?" Yates leaned close and murmured back, "My eyes are full of tears, and I am smiling so wide my face hurts. I am looking at you as though you are the sun, and I am a flower that has been waiting all winter to bloom." Zelda's own eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand tightly. The ceremony proceeded, the familiar words of the marriage service taking on profound meaning. When Yates spoke his vows, his voice rang out clear and strong, promising to love and cherish Zelda in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as they both should live. Zelda's voice was softer but no less certain as she made the same promises to him. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Zelda tenderly, and the congregation broke into applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, Zelda's hand on Yates's arm, both of them radiant with happiness. The reception was held at the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food the community had contributed. There was music and dancing, and Yates guided Zelda through a simple waltz, holding her close and describing the scene around them. The happy faces, the children running between tables, the evening sun slanting through the windows. "Are you happy?" he asked as they swayed together. "I have never been happier in my entire life," Zelda replied. "I heard your voice and knew you were the one, and now you are my husband. It feels like a dream." "I saw your face that first day and believed in destiny," Yates said. "I have never believed in such things before, but how else can I explain what happened between us? We were meant to find each other." As the evening wound down, They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon Marcus had lent them for the drive to their new home. The little house on the Triple Creek Ranch was lit with lanterns Yates had prepared earlier, casting a warm glow across the porch. Yates carried Zelda over the threshold, as tradition demanded, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ingram." Zelda reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the features she had memorized. "I love you, Yates Ingram. Thank you for seeing past my blindness to the woman beneath." "I do not see past your blindness, Zelda. I see all of you, and I love all of you, every part. Your strength, your grace, your wisdom, your humor. You are perfect exactly as you are." They spent their first night as husband and wife learning each other in new ways, speaking in whispers and touches, building a foundation of intimacy that would sustain them through all the years ahead. The following morning, Zelda woke in her new home and listened to the unfamiliar sounds around her. The creak of the house settling, the lowing of cattle in the distance, Yates's steady breathing beside her. She had memorized the layout of the rooms, and now she began the process of making this house truly hers through daily living. Yates proved to be a patient and considerate husband, always mindful of her needs but never treating her as helpless. He organized the kitchen so she could find everything easily, established clear pathways between rooms, and described any changes he made to the layout. Zelda quickly became as confident navigating her new home as she had been in her father's house. She established routines that gave structure to her days. She learned to cook on the cast iron stove, to tend a small vegetable garden by feel and smell, to do laundry and mending. Yates bought her chickens to raise, and she loved going out each morning to collect eggs, learning each hen's personality through their different clucks and movements. In the evenings, after Yates finished his work with the horses, they would sit together on the porch and he would describe his day. He talked about the new foals being born, the challenges of training young horses, the satisfaction of seeing his breeding program begin to produce results. Zelda listened with genuine interest, offering insights that often proved surprisingly valuable. "You have never seen a horse, not since you were 7, Yates said one evening. "Yet you understand them better than men who have worked with them for decades." "I listen," Zelda said simply. "You tell me how they behave, and I think about why they might behave that way. Also, I think sometimes not seeing them with my eyes helps me understand them better. I am not distracted by their appearance. I think about their nature." As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus visited every Sunday, often staying for dinner, and he could see that his daughter was thriving. The ranch work kept Yates busy, but he always made time for Zelda, never too tired to sit with her in the evenings, to read to her, or simply to hold her hand and talk about their day. One evening in October, Zelda had news that made her nervous to share. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before saying anything. Now, sitting with Yates on the porch as the sun set, she took his hand and pressed it against her abdomen. "There is a baby growing here," she said quietly. "Our child. It will come sometime in late April, I think." Yates sat frozen for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He swept Zelda into his arms, careful not to squeeze too tightly, and spun her around. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Zelda, this is wonderful news." "You are not worried?" Zelda asked. "About me being blind, about how I will manage?" "You will manage beautifully, just as you manage everything. And I will be here to help. We will do this together like we do everything." Marcus received the news with equal joy, though tempered with concern for his daughter's welfare. Yates assured him that Zelda would have the best care available, and that he would hire help if needed to ensure she was not overtaxed. The winter months passed slowly as they prepared for the baby's arrival. The ladies from church came to help Zelda sew tiny garments and prepare the small bedroom that would serve as a nursery. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges that could harm tender skin. Zelda's pregnancy progressed normally, though she found the changes in her body disorienting at first. She was accustomed to knowing exactly where her body was in space, and the shifting balance threw her off. Yates was endlessly patient, adjusting to her changing needs, helping her navigate when her usual confidence faltered. In late April, with the prairie once again blooming with wildflowers, Zelda went into labor on a warm afternoon. Marcus rode out to fetch the midwife while Yates stayed with his wife, trying to hide his terror behind a calm demeanor. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning, and there were moments when Yates feared he might lose both wife and child. But Zelda was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when the first rays of dawn light filtered through the bedroom window, the thin wail of a newborn filled the house. The midwife cleaned the baby and placed the infant in Zelda's waiting arms. "A boy," the midwife announced. "Healthy and strong, with a fine set of lungs." Zelda held her son and felt his tiny face with her fingertips, learning him through touch as she learned everything. Yates sat beside her on the bed, his arm around his wife's shoulders, looking down at the tiny person they had created together. "He is perfect," Yates said, his voice choked with emotion. "He has dark hair like yours, and I think he has your nose." "Tell me everything about how he looks," Zelda said. "I want to see him through your eyes." Yates described their son in loving detail. The downy dark hair, the tiny fingernails like little shells, the way his small fist closed reflexively around his father's finger, the perfect shell of his ears, the way his face scrunched up when he prepared to cry. They named him Matthew Marcus Ingram, honoring Zelda's father with the middle name. Marcus himself arrived later that morning, exhausted from his anxious vigil, and his weathered face crumpled with emotion when he held his grandson for the first time. "He is a miracle," the older man said. "A pure miracle. Your mother would have been beside herself with joy." The weeks after Matthew's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and new routines. Zelda navigated motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything, learning to care for her son through touch and sound. She could tell by his different cries what he needed: hunger, discomfort, or simply the need to be held. She nursed him confidently, changed his diapers, bathed him in the small tub Yates had prepared. Yates marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her. He helped when he could, rising in the night to bring Matthew to her for feeding, changing diapers, walking the floor with a fussy baby so Zelda could rest. They worked as a team, as they always had, and their love deepened through this new shared challenge. As Matthew grew from infant to baby, the house filled with new sounds: his babbling, his laughter, his crying. Zelda learned to anticipate his needs, to keep him safe as he began to crawl and then to walk. She created a secure environment where he could explore without danger, and she encouraged his independence even as she remained always aware of his location through sound. Yates continued to excel in his work, and Mr. Sullivan made good on his promise of a partnership stake in the breeding operation. By the time Matthew was 2 years old, Yates had saved enough to purchase a small parcel of land adjacent to the ranch, with plans to eventually establish his own horse breeding business while maintaining his partnership with Triple Creek. Life was good. Their small family thrived. Matthew was a bright, active child who loved both his parents equally and showed no concern that his mother could not see. To him, It was simply part of who she was, like her dark hair or her gentle voice. When Matthew was 3, Zelda discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in the spring when Matthew was nearly 4, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Louise Ingram. Sarah was different from her brother, quieter and more contemplative. Where Matthew had been all energy and constant motion, Sarah was content to sit peacefully, observing the world around her with solemn gray eyes. Yates joked that she had inherited her mother's thoughtful nature, while Matthew had gotten his father's restless energy. The years passed in a blur of raising children, building their business and deepening their partnership. Marcus grew older and eventually retired from running the livery stable, spending more time at the ranch helping with his grandchildren. Matthew and Sarah adored their grandfather and he delighted in them. When Matthew was 8 and Sarah was 4, tragedy struck. Marcus, who had seemed vigorous and healthy despite his advancing years, died suddenly one morning of what the doctor said was a heart seizure. Zelda was devastated, losing the parent who had been her anchor and support through so many challenges. Yates held her through her grief, letting her cry, listening when she needed to talk about memories of her father. The children, sensing their mother's sadness, were unusually quiet and gentle, bringing her small offerings of wildflowers and sitting close to her. The funeral was well attended, as Marcus had been respected throughout the community. Zelda stood at the graveside, Yates's arm around her waist, and spoke about her father with a steady voice. He taught me that blindness was not a cage, but simply a different way of experiencing the world. He never pitied me or treated me as less than whole. He expected me to be strong and capable, and through those expectations, I became both. He was the best of men, and I will miss him every day of my life. After Marcus's death, Zelda threw herself into her family and the business that was growing steadily. Yates had purchased several more parcels of land, and their horse breeding operation was becoming known throughout Wyoming territory and beyond. They hired additional help, including a young woman named Clara who assisted Zelda with the household work and the children. Matthew grew into a tall, strong boy who was as comfortable on horseback as his father. He had inherited Yates's gift with horses and often helped in the corrals after school. Sarah was quieter, preferring books and music, and she had her mother's gift for seeing beneath surfaces to understand people's true natures. When Matthew was 12 and Sarah was 8, another son was born whom they named Thomas Marcus, honoring Zelda's father. Thomas was a happy, easy baby who brought fresh joy to the household. By this time, the family was prosperous enough that Zelda had ample help with the household, though she still insisted on being fully involved in raising her children. More years passed. The children grew. Matthew eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the horse operation, proving himself a shrewd businessman in addition to being skilled with animals. He courted and married a sensible young woman named Rachel, and they built a house on the property near his parents. Sarah became a teacher at the school in Green River, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. She remained at home until she was 23, when she married a lawyer from Cheyenne who had come to Green River on business and stayed after meeting her. Thomas, the youngest, inherited his mother's musical talent and went east to study at a conservatory, though he always came home for summers and holidays. Through all these years, Yates and Zelda's love never wavered. They grew older together, their hair going gray, their faces gaining lines, but the bond between them only strengthened. Every evening they would sit together on the porch of the home they had built, and Yates would describe the sunset colors, the movement of clouds, the beauty of the land they had claimed as their own. You remember the day we met?" Zelda asked one evening when they were both in their 60s, grandchildren playing in the yard before them. "Every detail," Yates said. "You were standing outside the general store and you looked so peaceful and present. I had been drifting for years, but when I saw you, I finally understood what I had been searching for." "I heard your voice and I knew," Zelda said softly. "Before you even finished speaking, something in me recognized you. People used to say that was impossible, that you could not know someone from just their voice. But I did know you. I knew your kindness, your strength, your good heart. My blindness gave me that gift. I saw your face and I believed in destiny for the first time in my life," Yates replied. "I had never believed in fate or meant to be before that moment, but there was no other explanation for what I felt. You were my destiny, Zelda. Everything in my life led me to that dusty street in Green River so I could meet you." "We have been blessed," Zelda said. "3 wonderful children, grandchildren, a life built on love and honest work. My father told me once that the heart knows things the mind cannot explain. He was right. He raised an extraordinary woman. I wish I could tell him how grateful I am for that." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, Yates holding Zelda's hand as he had held it for over 40 years, still marveling at the gift of her presence in his life. The years continued to roll past. Wyoming Territory became the state of Wyoming. The wild frontier gradually became more settled, though the land retained its fierce beauty. Green River grew from a dusty town into a proper small city, with paved streets and electric lights and all the modern conveniences of the new century. Through all these changes, Yates and Zelda remained constants in each other's lives. When Yates's hands became too stiff with arthritis to work with horses as he once had, Matthew fully took over the business. When Zelda's hearing began to fade slightly, making it harder for her to navigate by sound, Yates became her willing guide without making her feel diminished. They lived to see their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with a party attended by seemingly half the state, with speeches and toasts, and much laughter. Yates gave a toast that left not a dry eye in the house. "When I was a young man, I thought I knew what life had to offer. I thought success meant owning land, building a business, making a name for myself. Then I met a blind woman standing outside a general store, and she taught me what life truly meant. She showed me that strength comes in many forms, that love is not about what you see but what you feel, that home is not a place but a person. Zelda, you have been my home for 50 years. You are my home still. Thank you for choosing to walk this path with me." Zelda, her hair now white and her face lined with age, smiled through happy tears. "Thank you for describing the path to me every step of the way. Through your eyes I have seen the world. Through your love I have felt whole." They lived into their 70s, both remaining remarkably healthy despite their advancing age. They died within 6 months of each other, Yates going first peacefully in his sleep one winter night, and Zelda following the next spring, as though she had simply decided to join him rather than remain in the world without her partner. At Zelda's funeral, their son Matthew spoke about his parents' love story, about how they had proved that different circumstances could not diminish true love, that what matters is not what obstacles life presents, but how two people choose to face them together. "My mother could not see with her eyes," Matthew said, "but she saw with her heart, and her heart never steered her wrong. My father believed in destiny, and my mother was his destiny. They built a life together that blessed not just their own family but this entire community. Their love story proves that real love sees beyond surfaces to the soul beneath. We should all be so lucky as to find what they found in each other." The congregation sang hymns that Zelda had loved, and they buried her next to Yates on a hillside overlooking the land they had built their life upon. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanged, while below them the ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's management, a living legacy of what two people could build when they chose to believe in each other. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of the blind woman who heard a voice and knew her destiny, and the cowboy who saw a face and believed in fate. It became a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love comes in unexpected packages, and that sometimes the greatest gifts require us to see with more than just our eyes. The small house where they had started their married life still stood on the ranch property, preserved by the family as a memorial. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, people claimed they could hear laughter echoing from that house, or see two figures sitting on the porch in the fading light. Whether these were ghosts or simply memories made solid by the power of love, no one could say for certain. What was certain was that Yates and Zelda Ingram had left an indelible mark on everyone who knew them. They had proved that limitations are only as restrictive as we allow them to be, that love can transcend any obstacle, and that sometimes a chance meeting in a dusty frontier town can change not just two lives, but ripple outward to affect countless others. Their story became woven into the fabric of Green River's history, told and retold, each generation finding new meaning in it. To some it was a story about overcoming disability, to others it was about the power of true love, and to still others it was about the importance of seeing the person beneath the surface. All these interpretations held truth, because Yates and Zelda's story was large enough to contain multitudes. But at its heart, it was simple. Two people met. They recognized something essential in each other. They chose to build a life together despite the obstacles society might have seen. And through that choice, they created something beautiful and lasting that enriched not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they touched. The land they had claimed and worked continued to produce fine horses long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren continued their work, expanding and improving it, always maintaining the standards of quality and integrity that Yates and Zelda had established. The business eventually became one of the premier horse breeding operations in the western United States, known for both the quality of its stock and the ethical treatment of its animals. But more than the business success, Yates and Zelda's true legacy was the love they had shared and the example they had set. In a hard land during a hard time, they had chosen kindness and partnership. They had faced challenges with grace and had built something lasting on a foundation of mutual respect and deep affection. Matthew lived until he was 86, always speaking of his parents with profound respect and love. On his own deathbed, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, his last words were about the lesson his parents had taught him. "Love is not something you find by looking," he whispered. "It is something you recognize when you hear it, when you feel it in your soul." My mother could not see my father with her eyes, but she saw him more clearly than most people see anything in their entire lives. Remember that. Look beneath the surface. Listen with your heart. That is how you find what matters. And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to the power of love to transcend limitations and create something beautiful and enduring. In the end, it did not matter that Zelda had been blind or that they had met by chance on a dusty street in 1878. What mattered was that they had recognized each other, had chosen each other, and had built a life together that stood as proof that true love sees with the heart, not the eyes. The blind woman heard his voice and knew her destiny. The cowboy saw her face and believed in fate. Together, they created a love story for the ages, one that would continue to inspire long after the Wild West had faded into history and legend. Their story became one of the great romances of the American frontier, not because it was dramatic or tragic, but because it was real and true and lasting. And perhaps that is the greatest love story of all. Not the passionate flame that burns bright and fast, but the steady warmth that endures through decades, through challenges, through the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. Yates and Zelda Ingram had that kind of love, and it made all the difference.